Shalom and welcome to Mountain Torah Fellowship. My name is Bill. Today's teaching covers the fourth Torah portion in the traditional cycle, Vayera, or He Appeared. Here we see a picture of Abraham outside his tent when three men appear to him. So let's start at the beginning of the Torah portion at Genesis 18:1. Genesis 18:1. Then Adonai appeared to him at Mamre's large trees while he was sitting in the entrance of his tent during the heat of the day. When he lifted up his eyes to see, suddenly three men were standing right by him. When he saw them, he ran from the entrance of his tent to meet them and bowed down to the ground. Then he said, "My Lord, if now I have found favor in your eyes, please do not pass by your servant. Please let a little water be brought so you can wash your feet and make yourselves comfortable under the tree. And let me bring a bit of bread so that you can refresh yourselves. Then you can pass on, since you have passed by your servant." They said, "Do just as you have said." So Abraham hurried into the tent to Sarah and said, "Quick, knead 3 measures of fine flour and prepare bread loaves." Then to the herd, Abraham ran and took a young ox, tender and good, and he gave it to the servant who prepared it quickly. Then he took butter and milk and the young ox that he had prepared and set it before them. While he was standing by them under the tree, they ate. Then they said to him, "Where is Sarah, your wife?" "There in the tent," he said. Then he said, "I will most surely return to you in about a year's time. Surprisingly, Sarah, your wife, will have a son." Sarah was listening at the entrance of the tent, which was behind him. Now Sarah and Abraham were old, advanced in years. Sarah had stopped having the way of women. So Sarah laughed to herself, saying, "After I've grown decrepit, can I have desire, and my Lord so old?" Then Adonai said to Abraham, "Why is it that Sarah laughed, saying, 'Can I really give birth when I am so old?' Is anything too difficult for Adonai? At the appointed time, I will return to you in about a year, and Sarah will have a son." Sarah denied it, saying, "I didn't laugh," for she was afraid. But he said, "No, for you did laugh." As is the norm, the traditional title for this Torah portion, He Appeared, comes from the first passage in verse 1. Still in verse 1, the word Adonai here in the Tree of Life version is rendered as Lord in the King James Version and most English Bibles. It is the Hebrew word Yahuwah, Yod-He, Vav-He. So we know that Abba Father is in the house, or more specifically, in the tent in this case. This is a difficult passage for Jewish rabbis to explain, for in their thinking, Yahuwah cannot appear to men, even though this is what the passage clearly says. To admit so would open the door of possibility to the veracity of the Christian claim that Jesus is God in the flesh, something unthinkable for most rabbis. So how do the rabbis not only explain Yahuwah's appearing to Abraham in his tent door, but also to his eating meat and dairy together, something forbidden in Orthodox Judaism? Jewish commentary on this takes several approaches to this dilemma for them. One states that the 3 messengers were really angels. Another claims this is actually only an angel speaking for Yah. Still another asserts that the presence of Yahuwah is everywhere, and because of Abraham's righteousness, he had a heightened awareness of the presence of the Most High, allowing him to spiritually perceive Yahuwah's presence. All of these ignore the plain reading of the text that Abraham literally saw, ate with, and talked to Yah. Finally, one Jewish Torah commentator dodges the issue in his commentary by saying that the 3 guests were 3 angels, and that Torah's wording to imply that Yahuwah literally appeared to Abraham and Sarah is a scribal error. When all else fails, blame it on the scribes. We can learn much about the Jewish rabbis' blindness to the Messiah from their treatment of this subject. We can also learn much from the all-too-human trait of conforming the word of Yah to fit our preconceived biases. Jews do not have a monopoly on this activity. We see it persistently in Christian churches and from Christian theologians who do the same things to justify their departure from the biblical roots of their faith. I strive diligently to avoid this which is why I often go to great lengths to make a simple point. I want Scripture to speak into me, not the other way around. And then in verse 3, both the Tree of Life version and the King James version have the word Lord, either with initial capital letter or small caps. This word is Adonai, Aleph, Dalet, Vav, Nun, Yod. I just don't understand why the translators did not and do not use the correct words. The Tree of Life version translates Yahweh as Adonai and Adonai as Lord. You may have heard that many who observe Judaism believe there is a prohibition on eating dairy and meat together. That comes from the incorrect interpretation of Exodus 23:19, Exodus 34:26, and Deuteronomy 14:12. Let me share those verses on screen. Exodus 23:19, the best of the fruits, first fruits of your ground, you shall bring into the house of the Lord your God. You shall not boil a young goat in its mother's milk. Exodus 34:26, the best of the first fruits of your ground, you shall bring to the house of the Lord your God. You shall not boil a young goat in its mother's milk. In Deuteronomy 14:21, you shall not eat anything that has died naturally. You may give it to the sojourner who is within your towns, but that he may eat it, or you may sell it to a foreigner. For you are a people holy to the Lord your God. You shall not boil a young goat in its mother's milk. All three of these verses contain a sentence something like, you shall not boil a young goat in its mother's milk. They take this verse, add a teaspoon of Pharisee leaven, and conclude dairy and meat products cannot be eaten together. That misinterpretation leads to additional rabbinical rules about how long to wait between eating these two categories of food, how far apart utensils used to prepare meat and dairy must be kept from each other, leading to separate refrigerators and separate kitchens and separate sets of utensils and dishware, along with many other rabbinic rules found nowhere in his holy word. Verse 8 from chapter 18 destroys that idea in 13 Hebrew words. Let me put it back on screen. In verse 8, we read, then he took butter and milk and the young ox that he had prepared and set it before them. While he was standing by them under the tree, they ate. Abraham served Yahweh and the other two visitors dairy and meat at the same time, not 4 hours or 8 hours apart or whatever the rabbinic rule is, at the same time, and they ate. The true meaning of the three mother's milk verses addresses not giving your best to Yah if you properly unpack them, and has nothing to do with literally boiling a young goat in its mother's milk, and everything to do with offering Yahweh your finest and your best. That's for another teaching, for another time, though. But the big story in this passage is the promise of a son with Sarah. Some question whether Sarah is supernaturally impregnated with this son, but Genesis 15:4 assures us this is literally Abraham's seed. And that verse reads, then behold, the word of Yahweh came to him saying, this one will not be your heir, but in fact, one who will come from your own body will be your heir. But this one referred to is Eleazar, Abraham's servant, if you read the passage in context. Let's read the rest of chapter 18. Then the men got up from there and looked down over Sodom. Abraham was walking with them to send them off. When Yahweh said, should I keep secret from Abraham what I am about to do, seeing that Abraham will most certainly become a great and mighty nation, and in him all the nations of the earth will be blessed? For I have made myself known to him so that he will command his sons and his household after him to keep the way of Yahweh by doing righteousness and justice, so that Yahweh may bring upon Abraham what he has spoken about him. Then Yahweh said, the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great indeed, and their sin is very grievous indeed. I want to go down now and see if they deserve destruction, as its outcry has come to me, and if not, I will know. Then the men turned from there and went toward Sodom, but Abraham was still standing before Yahweh. Abraham drew near and said, will you really sweep away the righteous with the wicked? Suppose there are 50 righteous within the city. Will you sweep away and not spare the place for the sake of 50 righteous who are in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to cause the righteous to die with the wicked, so that the righteous and the wicked share the same fate. Far be it from you. Shall the judge of the whole world not exercise justice? Then Yahweh said, if I find in Sodom 50 righteous people within the city, I will spare the whole place for their sake. Then Abraham answered and said, look, pray, I have decided to speak to my Lord, though I am dust and ashes. Suppose the 50 righteous people are lacking 5. Will you destroy the whole city for lack of 5? And he said, I will not destroy it if I find 45 there. So he spoke to him yet again and said, perhaps 40 will be found there. And he said, I will not do it for the sake of the 40. And he said, please let my Lord not be angry, so I may speak. Perhaps 30 will be found there. And he said, I will not do it if I find 30 there. And then he said, look, pray, I have decided to speak to my Lord. Perhaps 20 will be found there. And he said, I will not destroy it for the sake of the 20. Then he said, please let my Lord be angry, so I may speak once more. Perhaps 10 will be found there. And he said, I will not destroy it for the sake of the 10. Now, when he had finished speaking to Abraham, Yahweh left, and Abraham returned to his place. Abraham humbly negotiates with Yahweh to save Sodom, with the final agreement being that if 10 who are righteous are found, Sodom and all in it will be spared. Now, Yahweh, of course, being omniscient, knows how many righteous are in Sodom, but he graciously entertains Abraham's negotiations. I did a little research and found 2 similar estimates of the population of Sodom and Gomorrah and the surrounding area at this time. One estimated 400,000 and the other estimated hundreds of thousands. A lot, no pun intended, of souls living there. Let's keep reading to find out how things turned out. Now the 2 angels came to Sodom in the evening while Lot was sitting at the gate of Sodom. When Lot saw them, he got up to meet them and bowed down with his face to the ground. Then he said, here, please, my lords, please turn aside to your servant's house. Spend the night and wash your feet. Then you can get up early and go on your way. But they said, no, we will spend the night in the open plaza. But he urged them strongly, so they turned aside to him and they came into his house. He prepared a feast for them and baked matzah, and they ate. They had not yet lain down when the men of the city, the men of Sodom, surrounded the house from youth to elderly, all the people without exception. And they called out to Lot and said to him, where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out so that we can have relations with them. But Lot went out to the doorway and shut the door behind him and said, please, my brothers, don't act wickedly. Look, I have 2 daughters who haven't been intimate with a man. Please let me bring them out to you. Do to them whatever is good in your eyes. However, do nothing to these men, since they have come under the protection of my roof. Get out of the way, they said. And they said, this one came as an outsider and dares to judge. Now we'll treat you worse than them. So they strongly pressed against the man Lot and moved in close to break the door down. But the men reached out their hands, brought Lot into the house with them, and shut the door. Then they struck the men at the doorway of the house with blindness from youth to elderly, so that they gave up trying to find the doorway. Then the men said to Lot, who else related to you is still here? A son-in-law, your sons and your daughters, whoever else is related to you in the city, bring them out of the place. For we are about to destroy this place, because their outcry has become so great before Yahweh that Yahweh has sent us to destroy it. So Lot went out and spoke to his sons-in-law who were going to marry his daughters. Get up, he said, get out of this place, for Yahweh is about to destroy the city. But in the eyes of his sons-in-law, he was like a joker. So when morning dawned, the angels rushed Lot, saying, get up, take your wife and your daughters who are here, or else you will be swept away with the city's iniquity. But he hesitated, so the men grabbed his hand, his wife's hand, and his 2 daughters' hands because of Yahweh's compassion for him, and they brought him out and left him outside the city. When they brought them outside, one said, flee for your life. Do not look behind you, and do not stop anywhere in the surrounding area. Escape to the hills, or else you will be swept away. But Lot said to them, no, my lord, please, look, please, your servant has found favor in your eyes, and you have magnified your merciful loyalty, which you have shown me by letting me live. But I cannot escape to the hill country, for the disaster will overtake me, and I will die. Look, please, this city is close enough to flee there, and it's little. Please let me escape there. Isn't it small? And let me live. So he said to him, behold, I will grant your request concerning this matter too, not to demolish the city of which you have spoken. Hurry, flee to safety there, because I cannot do anything until you arrive there. This is why the town is named Zoar. The moment the sun rose upon the land, Lot entered Zoar, and Yahweh rained sulfur and fire upon Sodom and Gomorrah from Yahweh out of the sky. So he demolished these cities and the whole surrounding area, all the inhabitants of the cities and the vegetation of the ground. But his wife looked behind him, and she turned into a pillar of salt. Now Abraham rose early in the morning to the place where he had stood before Yahweh, and he looked down toward Sodom and Gomorrah and toward the entire land of the surrounding area, and saw, behold, the smoke of the land ascended like smoke from a furnace. So it was, as God destroyed the cities of the surrounding area, that God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the upheaval when he demolished the cities where Lot had dwelled. Verse 1 tells us that two angels came to Sodom. Not two angels, but the two angels. This leads me to conclude that the other two men who accompanied Yahweh in the last chapter to visit Abraham and Sarah were angels. Some think they were Yahusha and the Ruach HaKodesh. No one, I have read, thinks they were mortal men. Full disclosure, not every translation I looked at includes the phrase, the two angels. Most do, but some translations read just two angels. Lot referred to them as lords from the word Adonai, or master, so he knew who and what they were. I have a few comments. First, the men of the city wanted to know the angels, that is, have homosexual relations with them, not get acquainted with them over tea and matzah. The word sodomy gets its origin here. That makes me wonder how they managed to grow to 400,000 people. Then Lot offered his virgin daughters to the mob in the place of the angels. The angels take charge and strike all the men with blindness. Lot negotiates with Yah like Uncle Abraham did and gets permission to go to Zoar, not the wilderness, and leaves Sodom with his wife and their two daughters. The fiancés of the daughters laughed at Lot and declined the invitation to depart and perished because of that decision. We conclude that not 10 were found righteous, and fire and sulfur or brimstone rains down upon Sodom and Gomorrah. Then, despite the clear warning, Mrs. Lot turned back to look and became a stationary object comprised of salt. There is a message that I think is important to note. When you are fleeing from what is unholy, don't turn back and long for the good old days. Many who walk away from churchianity and its half-truths and deceptions and decide to walk in the truth of his complete word decide to look back like Mrs. Lot. That often doesn't end well. Not looking back means you leave friends and family behind. Not looking back means you leave unholy traditions of man behind. Not looking back means you are looking forward and walking, hopefully running, towards your Messiah. Here's the rest of chapter 19. Then Lot went up from Zoar and dwelt on the mountain, his two daughters with him, and because he was afraid to dwell in Zoar. So he lived in a cave, he and his two daughters. Then the firstborn said to the younger, our father is old, and there is no man in the land to come to us, as is the custom of the whole land. Come on, let's make our father drink wine so that we can lie with him and keep the seed from our father alive. So they made their father drink wine that night, and the firstborn came and lay down with their father, yet he did not know that she lay down and got up. On the following day, the firstborn said to the younger, see, I slept with my father last night. Let's make him drink wine tonight as well. Come on, sleep with him so we'll keep the seed from our father alive. So they made their father drink wine that night as well. And the younger got up and lay down with him, and he did not know that she lay down and got up. So Lot's two daughters became pregnant by their father. Then the firstborn gave birth to a son and named him Moab. He is the ancestor of the Moabites to this day. The younger also gave birth to a son and named him Ben-Ami. He is the ancestor of the sons of Ammon to this day. This chapter keeps getting stranger and stranger. One point to note, Ruth, King David's great-grandmother, was a Moabite. I'll read chapter 20 without comment, so we keep up with the storyline. Then Abraham journeyed from there to the land of the Negev and settled between Kadesh and Shur. While he was dwelling as an outsider in Gerar, Abraham said of Sarah, his wife, "She is my sister." So King Abimelech of Gerar sent for and took Sarah. But God came to Abimelech in a dream at night and said to him, "Behold, you are as good as dead because of the woman whom you have taken, since she is a married woman." Now Abimelech had not come near her, so he said, "My lord, will you slay a nation even though innocent? Didn't he say to me, 'She's my sister'?" And she herself even said, "He's my brother. I did this with integrity of my heart and guiltlessness of my hands." And God said to him in a dream, "Yes, I myself knew that you did this with integrity of your heart. So I myself prevented you from sinning against me. That is why I did not allow you to touch her. So now return the man's wife, for he is a prophet, and let him pray for you, and you will live. But if you do not return her, know that you will surely die, you and all who are yours." Abimelech rose early in the morning, called all his servants, and spoke all these words in their ears. And the men were very frightened. Then Abimelech called to Abraham and said to him, "What have you done to us? And how have I sinned against you that you brought great sin upon me and my kingdom? You've done to me things that should not be done." Abimelech also said to Abraham, "What motivated you to do this thing?" Abraham said, "Because I thought there is certainly no fear of God in this place, so they'll kill me because of my wife. And besides, she really is my sister. She's my father's daughter, though not my mother's daughter. Then she became my wife. So when God made me wander away from my father's house, I said to her, 'This is your loyalty that you must show me. In every place we go, say of me, he is my brother.' Then Abimelech took sheep, cattle, male slaves and female slaves, and gave them to Abraham, and returned his wife Sarah to him. Then Abimelech said, 'Look, my land is before you. Dwell wherever it pleases you.' At the same time, he said to Sarah, 'Look, I've given 1,000 shekels to your brother. Look, it is compensation for everything that happened. So to everyone with you, you are vindicated.' And Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech, his wife, and his female slaves so that they could bear children. For Yahweh had completely locked up every womb in Abimelech's household because of Sarah, Abraham's wife." Continuing in chapter 21, "Then Yahweh visited Sarah just as he had said, and Yahweh did for Sarah just as he had spoken. So Sarah became pregnant and gave birth to a son for Abraham in his old age, at the appointed time that God had told him. Abraham named his son, who was born to him, whom Sarah bore for him, Isaac. And Abraham circumcised Isaac, his 8-day-old son, just as God had commanded him. Abraham was 100 years old when Isaac, his son, was born to him. So Sarah said, 'God has made laughter for me. Everyone who hears will laugh with me.' She also said, 'Who would have said to Abraham, Sarah has nursed children, for I have given birth to a son in his old age.' Isaac is born in fulfillment of Yah's promise. His name means laughter, a lifetime reminder of Sarah's laugh when she overheard that she was to bear a child at the age of 99. Let's look at the recounting of Isaac's birth in Jubilees. I'm going to be in Jubilees 16, starting in verse 10. And in this month, Abraham moved from Hebron and departed and dwelt between Kadesh and Shur in the mountains of Gerar. And in the middle of the 5th month, he moved from thence and dwelt at the well of the oath. And in the middle of the 6th month, Yahweh visited Sarah and did unto her as he had spoken, and she conceived. And she bare a son in the 3rd month, and in the middle of the month, at the time of which Yahweh had spoken to Abraham, on the festival of the first fruits of the harvest, Isaac was born. And Abraham circumcised his son on the 8th day. He was the first that was circumcised according to the covenant which is ordained forever. We should note with great interest that Isaac was born on the festival of the first fruits of the harvest in the middle of the 3rd month. This is Shavuot, which happens each year on the 15th day of the 3rd month. Isaac was born on Shavuot. Let's read a few more verses in Jubilees 16. And that all the seed of his, Abraham's son, should be Gentiles and be reckoned with the Gentiles. But from the sons of Isaac, one should become a holy seed and should not be reckoned among the Gentiles. For he should become the portion of the Most High, and all his seed had fallen into the possession of Elohim, that it should be unto Yahweh a people for his possession above all nations, and that it should become a kingdom and priests and a holy nation. I added Abraham in brackets there for context in verse 17, so you would understand who he was. The holy seed from Isaac is none other than Jacob, who, as we know, gets renamed Israel in Genesis 32, which we'll get to soon enough. The word translated as Gentiles is likely Goyim, the nations. In fact, that is how the Sefer Bible translated. Not to get ahead of the storyline too much, we will see in Exodus 19 these words. Exodus 19, starting at verse 3, Moses went up to God, and Yahweh called to him from the mountain, saying, Say this to the house of Jacob, and tell Bnei Yisrael, you have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I carried you on eagle's wings, and brought you to myself. Now then, if you listen closely to me, and keep my covenant, then you will be my own treasure from among all people, for all the earth is mine. So as for you, you will be to me a kingdom of Kohanim and a holy nation. These are the words which you are to speak to Bnei Yisrael. The house of Jacob and Bnei Yisrael, the children of Israel, are two ways of saying the same thing, repeated in verse 3 in different forms for emphasis. In Jubilees, we read that the house of Jacob, the children of Israel, should become a kingdom and a priest and a holy nation. And here in Exodus, we learn how the house of Jacob becomes a kingdom and priests and a holy nation. If you listen closely to my voice and keep my covenant. In Romans 11 and Jeremiah 11, an olive tree is used to represent Israel, or the house of Jacob. Romans 11 makes it clear that those from the nations other than the house of Jacob, often called Gentiles, are grafted into Israel, become children of Israel, that is, the house of Jacob, if they listen closely to his voice and keep his covenant. Let's take a look at two more verses in Jubilees 16. Verse 20, and he built there an altar to Yahweh, who had delivered him, and who was making him rejoice in the land of his sojourning. And he celebrated a festival of joy in this month 7 days near the altar, which he had built at the well of the oath. And he built booths for himself and for his servants on this festival. And he was the first to celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles on the earth. Abraham was the first to celebrate Sukkot, the Feast of Tabernacles. This is more than 400 years before Moses received the Torah. Let's get back to the main storyline in Genesis 21. The child grew and was weaned. Abraham made a big feast on the day Isaac was weaned. But Sarah saw the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham, making fun. So she said to Abraham, drive out this female slave and her son. The son of this female slave will not be an heir with my son, with Isaac. Now the matter was very displeasing in Abraham's eyes on account of his son. But God said to Abraham, do not be displeased about the boy and your slave woman. Whatever Sarah says to you, listen to her voice. For through Isaac shall your seed be called. I will make the son of the slave woman into a nation, because he is your seed. So Abraham got up early in the morning and took bread and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar, putting them on their shoulder and the child, and sent her away. She went and wandered about in the wilderness of Beersheba. When the water from the skin was finished, she abandoned the child under one of the bushes. Then she went and sat herself down opposite, about a bow shot away, for she had said, I can't bear to see the child dying. So she sat down opposite and lifted up her voice and wept. Then God heard the boy's voice, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, "What troubles you, Hagar? Do not be afraid, because God has heard the boy's voice where he is. Get up, lift the boy, and hold on to him with your hand, for I will make him a great nation." Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water, and she went and filled the water skin and gave the boy a drink. God was with the boy, and he grew. He dwelled in the wilderness and became an archer. He dwelled in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother took a wife for him in the land of Egypt. The title of the passage is titled Ishmael Banished Yet Delivered here in the Tree of Life version. Sarah had had enough of Hagar for a second time. Yahweh reaffirms his previous promise to Hagar, and Ishmael too will be made into a great nation. Chapter 21 wraps up with a covenant between Abimelech and Abraham. Now, it came about at the same time that Abimelech, with Phicol, the commander of his army, said to Abraham, "God is with you in all that you do. So now make a pledge to me here, by God, that you will not violate your word with me or with my descendants or with my offspring. As I have shown loyalty to you, show the same to me and to the land in which you have lived as an outsider." Abraham said, "I make a pledge." And now Abraham had rebuked Abimelech because of the well of water that Abimelech's servants had seized. So Abimelech said, "I don't know who did this thing, nor did you tell me, nor did I hear about it until today." Then Abraham took a flock of sheep and cattle and gave them to Abimelech, and the two of them made a covenant. Abraham set 7 young ewe lambs apart from the flock of sheep by themselves. Abimelech said to Abraham, "What do these 7 ewe lambs that you have set by themselves mean?" He said, "You are to accept the 7 ewe lambs from my hand, so that they may be a witness for me that I dug this well." That is why the place is named Beersheba, because both of them made a pledge. And they made a covenant in Beersheba. And then Abimelech got up with Phicol, the commander of his army, and they returned to the land of the Philistines. Then he planted a tamarisk tree in Beersheba and called there on the name of Yahweh, the everlasting God. He lived as an outsider in the land of the Philistines for many years. This is not the only time Abraham proves to be a wise businessman in business transactions. The Torah reading concludes with the binding of Isaac in chapter 22. Now it was after these things that God tested Abraham. He said to Abraham, "Hineni," he said. Then he said, "Take your son, your only son whom you love, Isaac, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains about which I will tell you." So Abraham got up early in the morning, saddled his donkey, and took 2 of his young men with him, and Isaac his son. He split wood for the burnt offering and got up and went to the place about which God had told him. On the 3rd day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place from a distance. Abraham said to his son, to his young men, "Sit yourselves down here with the donkey. As for me and the young man, we will go there, worship, and return to you." Then Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and put it on Isaac his son. In his hand he took the fire and the knife, so the 2 of them walked on together. Then Isaac said to Abraham his father, "My father?" And he said, "Here I am, my son." He said, "Look, there's the fire and the wood, but where's the lamb for a burnt offering?" Abraham said, "God will provide for himself a lamb for a burnt offering, my son." The 2 of them walked on together. When they came to the place about which God had told him, and Abraham built the altar there, laid out the wood, bound up Isaac his son, and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then Abraham reached out his hand and took the knife to slaughter his son. But the angel of Yahweh called to him from heaven and said, "Abraham, Abraham." He said, "Hineni." Then he said, "Do not reach out your hand against the young man. Do nothing to him at all. For now I know that you are one who fears God. You did not withhold your son, your only son, from me." Then Abraham lifted up his eyes, and behold, there was a ram just caught in the thick bushes by its horns. So Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering instead of his son. Abraham named that place Yahweh Vayera, as it is said today, "On the mountain Yahweh will provide." The angel of Yahweh called to Abraham a second time from heaven and said, "By myself I swear, It is a declaration of Adonai that because you have done this thing and you did not withhold your son, your only son, I will richly bless you and bountifully multiply your seed like the stars of heaven and like the sand that is on the seashore. And your seed will possess the gate of his enemies. In your seed, all the nations of the earth will be blessed because you obeyed my voice. Then Abraham returned to his young men, and they got up and went together to Beersheba. Then Abraham dwelled in Beersheba. Now it was after these things that it was told to Abraham, look, Milcah has also borne sons to Nahor, your brother. Uz, his firstborn, Buz, his brother, Kemuel, the father of Aram, Hesed, Hazo, Pildash, Yidlaf, and Bethuel. Then Bethuel fathered Rebekah. These 8 Milcah bore to Nahor, Abraham's brother. His concubine, whose name was Reumah, also bore Tebah, Gaham, Tahash, and Makah. There's a lot more to the comparison of Isaac and Yahusha than I'll share from this passage, but consider digging into this thought that Isaac is a type of Yahusha on your own. In other words, there are parallel events in their lives that are meant to foreshadow. Biblically, we see Old Testament figures whose lives foreshadow the lives of New Testament figures. Things, such as the Great Flood, can also be viewed as types as well. With that general definition in mind, I want to list just a few of the ways that I believe Isaac is a prophetic symbol of Yahusha. In verse 2, he's called your only son whom you love. In verse 2, there's also a reference to the land of Moriah. In verse 3, Isaac carried the wood that was to be used as part of a sacrifice. Yahusha carried his wooden cross. In verses 6 through 9, Isaac willingly submitted to the sacrifice as Yahusha did to his. In verse 9, Isaac was bound to the altar. Yahusha was bound before he was delivered to Pilate. In verse 13, Yah provided the sacrifice instead of Isaac. Yahusha became the sacrifice for our sins. There are more passages, but you get in other passages, but you get the idea. Isaac's life foreshadowed Yahusha's in many ways. My personal opinion is that another way Isaac's life foreshadowed that of Yahusha is his birthday. We read previously that Isaac was born on Shavuot. I believe Yahusha was as well. The prophetic symbology I just discussed briefly is enough evidence for me, but I know it is not for most others. And soon I will present a more formal, detailed presentation making the case for Yahusha's day of birth being Shavuot as well, so stay tuned. A parallel reading in Jubilees reveals that the testing of Abraham is similar to the testing of Job. Jubilees 17, verse 16, we read, behold, Abraham loveth Isaac his son, and he delighteth in him above all things else. Bid him offer him as a burnt offering on the altar, and thou wilt see if he will do this command. And thou wilt know if he is faithful in everything wherein thou dost try him. Yah knew Abraham had been faithful through many previous tests, and Abraham did not disappoint either here. Satan, revealed as the Prince Mastimah, is the one speaking in verse 16. Before we leave this passage, let's look again at verse 4. Put it up on screen. Verse 4 reads, on the third day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place from a distance. Scripture here tells us, it is my opinion anyway, that to Abraham, Isaac died the moment Yah told him in verse 2, take your son, your only son whom you love, Isaac, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains about which I will tell you. 3 days later, Isaac was spared and in Abraham's mind resurrected. If you think this is a stretch. Let's take a look at 1 Corinthians 15. Verse 4, that he was buried and he was raised on the third day according to the scriptures. Scriptures here must refer to the Old Testament. There's plenty in the New Testament that attests to the third day, being raised on the third day. But where in the Old Testament are we told that Yahusha would be raised on the third day? Well, here's one place. In Jonah, it's either the last verse of chapter 1 or the first verse of chapter 2, depending on your translation. We read, now Yahweh prepared a great fish to swallow Jonah, and Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. And in Matthew 12, we read, for just as Jonah was in the belly of the great fish for 3 days and 3 nights, so the Son of Man will be in the heart of the earth for 3 days and 3 nights. Could Genesis 22:4 be the second witness to the claim in 1 Corinthians 5:14? I believe it could be. This is something else for you to dig into if the Spirit moves you. I think it is less compelling than the verse from Jonah, but I find it interesting nonetheless. Let's take a look back at, we're going to look at some New Testament verses, the Parashah. We're going to start in Luke 17, if you want to turn there. Luke 17, and I'm going to start at verse 26. As it was in the days of Noah, so will it also be in the days of the Son of Man. They were eating, drinking, marrying, and being given in marriage until the day Noah entered the ark. And the flood came and destroyed them all. It was just the same in the days of Lot. They were eating, drinking, buying, selling, planting, building. But on the day Lot left Sodom, it rained fire and sulfur from heaven and destroyed them all. Things will be the same on the day when the Son of Man is made fully known. In that day, the one who is on the roof and his possessions in the house must not go down to take them away. In the same way, the one who is in the field must not turn back. Remember Lot's wife. Whoever tries to keep his life will lose it, but whoever loses it will preserve it. I tell you that on that night there will be 2 in bed, one will be taken along with and the other left. There will be 2 women grinding at the same place. One will be taken and the other left. As it was in the days of Noah and in the days of Lot at Sodom, cycles and patterns in the past are predictors of the fulfillment of prophecy yet to come. Next stop is in Romans 9. I'll read verses 6 through 8. But it is not enough, though the word of God has failed. But it is not as though the word of God has failed. For not all those who are descended from Israel are Israel, nor are they all children, because they are Abraham's seed. Rather, your seed shall be called through Isaac. That is, it is not the children of the flesh who are children of God. Rather, the children of the promise are counted as seed. This supports what I said earlier about just who Israel is. It is not those who are the children of the promise, whether they are physical descendants of Jacob or not. This passage from Galatians 4 brings home the same point. When something is repeated, it might just be important. I'll pick up in verse 21. Tell me, you who want to be under Torah, don't you understand the Torah? For it is written that Abraham had 2 sons, one by the slave woman and one by the free woman. But one, the woman by the slave, was born naturally, while the other, the son of the free woman, was through the promise. Now these things are being treated allegorically, for these are 2 covenants. One is from Mount Sinai, giving birth to slavery, that is Hagar. But this Hagar is Mount Sinai in Arabia and corresponds to the present Jerusalem, for she is in slavery along with her children. But the Jerusalem above is free. She is our mother. For it is written, rejoice, O barren woman who bears no children. Break forth and shout, you who suffer no labor pains. For more are the children of the desolate than of the one who has a husband. Now you, brothers and sisters, like Isaac, who are children of the promise, but just as at that time, the one born according to the flesh persecuted the one born according to the Ruach, so it is now. But what does Scripture say? Drive out the slave woman and her son, for the son of the slave woman shall not inherit with the son of the free woman. So then, brothers and sisters, we are not children of the slave woman, but of the free woman. Another passage to dwell on and dig into on your own. This is a similar exegesis from Paul, using only more words than he used in the Romans passage. There's one more passage from Hebrews I want to read as supporting evidence for what we read in Genesis. In Hebrews 6, starting at verse 13. Now, when God made his promise to Abraham, since he could swear by no one greater, he swore by himself, saying, surely I will bless you, and surely I will multiply you. And so after waiting patiently, Abraham reached the promise. For people swear by someone greater, and the oath as confirmation is an end to all their disputing. In the same way, God, determining to point out more clearly to the heirs of the promise the unchanging nature of his purpose, guaranteed it with an oath. So by two unchangeable things, in which it is impossible for God to lie, we who have fled for refuge might have strong encouragement to take hold of the hope set before us. We have this hope as an anchor of the soul, both firm and steady, a hope that enters the inner peace behind the curtain. Yeshua has entered there as a forerunner on our behalf, having become Kohen Gadol forever, according to the order of Melchizedek. Two more passages to finish my teaching. In James 2, starting at verse 14, what good is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone says he has faith but does not have works? Can such faith save him? If a brother or sister is naked and lacks daily food, and one of you says to them, go in shalom, keep warm and well fed, but you do not give them what the body needs, what good is it? So also faith, if it does not have works, is dead by itself. But someone will say, you have faith and I have works. Show me your faith without works, and I will show you faith by my works. You believe that God is one, you do well. The demons also believe and shudder. But do you want to know, you empty person, that faith without works is dead? Wasn't Abraham our father proved righteous by works when he offered up Isaac, his son, on the altar? You see that faith worked together with his works, and by the works of his faith was made complete. The scripture was fulfilled that says, and Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. And he was called God's friend. You see that a man is proved righteous by works and not by faith alone. And likewise, wasn't Rahab the prostitute also proved righteous by works when she welcomed the messengers and sent them out another way? For just as the body without the spirit is dead, so also faith without works is dead. Faith, my dear friends, is an active verb. And finally, 2 Peter chapter 2, starting at verse 4. For God did not spare angels when they sinned, but threw them into Sheol. He put them in chains of gloomy darkness to be held until the judgment. He did not spare the ancient world. He preserved only Noah, a proclaimer of righteousness, along with 7 others, when he brought a flood upon the world of the ungodly. He devastated the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, reducing them to ashes, making them an example of what is going to happen to the ungodly. He rescued Lot, a righteous man deeply troubled by the shameless immorality of the wicked. For that righteous man, while living among them, was tormented in his righteous soul day after day by lawless deeds he saw and heard. Therefore, the Lord certainly knows how to rescue the godly from trials and how to keep the unrighteous being punished until the day of judgment, especially those who follow after the flesh and its unclean desires and who despise the Lord's authority. Brazen and arrogant, these people do not tremble while slandering glorious beings. This passage offers a short recap of Sodom and Gomorrah and affirms a promise made and kept many times. Yahweh not only knows how to rescue the godly from trials, he actually does rescue the godly from trials time after time. That's what I have for today. I'm going to close with some final thoughts. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to drop them in the comments. So many final thoughts you could get from this teaching. Here's just a few that I have. Conform your belief to Yahweh's word. Do not contort his word to fit your own beliefs. In seminary speaks, that's exegesis versus eisegesis. Enjoy your cheeseburger. That's my reference to the eating dairy and meat together. Don't look back. Certainly learn from the past, but do not live in it. Learn from history, but don't dwell on it. Isaac was born on Shavuot. Note that for the future. The children of Israel are those who listen closely to Yah's voice and keep his covenant. Not necessarily bloodline relatives of the house of Jacob. And Abraham was the first to celebrate Sukkot, so we see 2 of the 7 annual feasts mentioned here in this Torah portion. Isaac is a type of Yehusha, and I believe that will lead us to the conclusion that they share a birthday. Faith is an active verb, just as believe is, just as love is. These are all active verbs. And Yah is faithful to rescue the righteous from trials. Thanks for listening. If you have those questions or comments, feel free to share them. Until next time, may you be richly blessed by your study of his word and the actions those words lead you to take out of your love for the Most High. Shalom.